This is going to be a tutorial on how to approach the revolve problems and an example of how to do revolve number one. Now, when I explain revolve to people, the way that makes the most sense to me is to treat this disk, this revolved object, like a piece of pie. Let's lay it flat and let's cut a piece of pie out of there. That cross section, right, what that pie looks like from the side is what we're going to be trying to draw. All right. Once we have that quote unquote piece of pie, then we're just going to simply revolve it around this axis. So now follow along what I'm doing, and it should make more sense to you once I show you the extrusion. Just keep in mind, I'm making a piece of pie here, so to speak. All right, so I'm going to take note of some of these dimensions, and I'm looking at it from the side. It's kind of a stepped design. There's two sides of cylinders. This whole cylinder's got a hole in there. I can make this solid and go and create that hole, or I can create the hole as I revolve. I'm going to show you the little bit simpler way, I think, of making the hole in my design, but it's going to require a couple of construction lines to make that happen. So let's go open up a new file. And I'm going to start a sketch. Do the orientation of this. I'm going to choose this plane, the XY plane, to go ahead and start my design. I'm going to start at the origin because it helps anchor my design to the workspace. Make sure I'm implementing these perpendicular relationships and constraints. And by starting on the origin, I already start with some constraints already figured out. So it makes my job a little bit easier. I'm going to put in the dimensions. I believe this side was 0.5, and I want to say this side was 1 inch. Let me recenter my screen here. Okay. Now, to create the hole in the axis, I'm going to use a couple of construction lines. And I'm going to start up here. It doesn't really matter where. When I put dimensions in, it'll figure that out. But I can't just leave this axis here unattached. Otherwise, the computer will won't give me a full constraint indication because it wants these connected. It wants to know where this axis begins and where it ends. So I can use construction lines to do that as well. I'm essentially just going to connect the dots right here, and it's going to help me out a lot when I try and constrain this. Now, referring back here, I've got a couple dimensions, both referring to the axis and a couple points on the cylinders. So let me put those in real quick. So axis to one side is 0.375, also known as 3/8 of an inch. And then I have the same start point to the outside of that cylinder, and that's double the 3/8 for 3/4 or 750. Now, the one dimension it doesn't give you here is between the two cylinders, so I'm going to guesstimate that that's probably 1 inch. All right, recenter, and that looks pretty good. I like to unclutter my numbers here, but that looks fine. Now, when I go ahead and extrude this, hopefully this is going to make a lot more sense to you about how these, I said extrude, we're talking about revolves. So for revolves, you need a profile and an axis. Now, it already figured out what profile I want, but I have to tell it what my axis is, and it's already highlighted there. So I click there, and voila, here is my disk object, which looks an awful lot like the one we see there. So remember, the piece of pie is our profile, and the axis is what we're spinning around to create our object.